The wedding coordinator's exact words were, "We'll just tuck her behind the column, she won't mind. She's easy." I was standing 4 feet away when she said it. She didn't know that, or she didn't care. Either way, she was talking about me, the way you'd talk about a folding chair nobody wanted to look at during the ceremony. I didn't say anything. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't correct her. I didn't go find my daughter and ask what she meant by it. I smoothed the front of my blue dress, the one I'd had tailored twice, so it would hang right on shoulders that carry more than they used to, and I walked to the seat I'd been assigned. Row 4, behind the second pillar of a chapel my late husband had kept out of foreclosure 9 years before anyone in that room ever said, "I do." They could move my chair. They could not move the papers. That's what I kept thinking, sitting there with a support beam eclipsing half my view of my only daughter's wedding, while a sealed letter sat in a lawyer's leather folder 3 rows back. Waiting for a moment, nobody in that chapel, except 2 people, knew was coming. Welcome back to Her Calm Revenge, where the women who get folded into the background are usually the ones holding the ledger. If you've ever been made small at your own family's biggest moment, moved out of the photo, seated out of the way, spoken about instead of spoken, to stay with me, this is where it turns. Stay with me to the end. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe, because next week's story might be the one you needed to hear first. My name is Carol Bennett. I'm 64 years old, and for 31 years I worked in a small-town bank, most of it across a desk from families reading the fine print nobody else wanted to read. I know what a lien looks like. I know what a promissory note looks like when it's about to expire. I know the difference between a gift and a loan dressed up to look like one. People see a woman my age in a blue dress and cardigan, and they think they know the whole story. They think, retired, harmless, easy to seat behind a pillar. They have never once been right. My husband Walter believed in exactly one thing above all others, and he said it so often it became the background hum of our marriage. A handshake is a nice story. He used to say, but a signature is the only thing that holds up in a room where nobody remembers what was promised. Walter didn't trust memory. He didn't trust good intentions. He trusted paper. That was the whole of him, distilled into a sentence. And it is the reason I was still sitting in that pew 3 years after his funeral, holding something nobody else in that chapel knew existed. We had one daughter, Lauren, and she was the center of both our lives from the day she was born. She married into money, real money, the kind that photographs well. Grant Whitmore's family owned Whitmore Vineyard and Events, 42 acres of rolling hillside with a restored 1920s chapel and a reception barn that had been on the cover of 2 regional bridal magazines. Grant's mother, Patricia, ran the business with a polish that made everyone around her feel one shade underdressed. I liked Grant well enough. Patricia was another matter. Patricia looked at my department store cardigans and my modest little house with the paid-off mortgage, and she made a decision about who I was before I'd said 20 words to her. Here is the thing nobody in that family knew. The thing I want to plant right now so you remember it later, because it matters more than anything else in this story. 9 years ago, long before Lauren ever met Grant, Whitmore Vineyard and Events had been months from foreclosure. I found that out the way I find most things out sideways, from an old colleague at another wedding, who mentioned that Patricia Whitmore had nearly lost the whole place after a bad renovation loan, and that somebody had bought the note off the bank at the last minute and saved it. Nobody knew who. Walter went very still when he heard it, the way he did when a number didn't add up. He didn't say anything that night. But 3 weeks later, I found a folder in his desk with a promissory note assigned to something called the Bennett Family Holdings, LLC, secured against 42 acres outside town. My husband, using our retirement savings, had quietly bought the mortgage note on Whitmore Vineyard and Events. He had no interest in controlling it and no wish to punish anyone. A bank he used to work for was about to foreclose on a family business in a town he loved, and he had the means to stop it and stay invisible while he did. Why would you do that and never tell anyone? I asked him. Because owning something quietly is the only way to own it completely, he said. The day people know you're holding their note, they start performing for you. I'd rather just watch and know. I want you to sit with that, because it's the whole engine of what happened at that wedding. My husband didn't have a crystal ball. He wasn't some psychic old man who saw the future. He was a careful man who read a room correctly once, acted on it without a word to anyone, and then did nothing else with the information for years, until his daughter fell in love with the son of the family whose business he had personally rescued. Without either family ever knowing, the other held the paper. Walter carried that quiet knowledge for 6 years, saying nothing, watching the vineyard recover from a distance he never once closed. Then his heart began to fail, and in his final year, sensing his time was going, he did what Walter always did. He put it in writing. He drew up a formal letter, notarized and sealed, and gave it to our family attorney, Harold Doyle, a man he'd trusted for 20 years, with one simple instruction. If Lauren ever marries at Whitmore Vineyard, he told Harold, give this to whoever is officiating and ask them to read it aloud at the ceremony. Carol will understand why. He never told me the contents. He told me only this. Carol, if that day ever comes, you'll already know how you were treated by the time the letter is read. Let it speak once, in a room too public for anyone to talk their way around it. That was Walter's foresight, not magic, behavior. He knew his daughter loved deeply and forgave easily, sometimes to a fault. He knew Patricia Whitmore ran rooms like a general, and he knew that I would either be treated with the dignity a mother of the bride deserves, or I wouldn't, and either way, the paper in Harold's folder would tell the truth. I didn't think about that letter every day. Grief doesn't leave room for plotting, but I never forgot it either. It sat in the back of my mind through the whole 18 months of Lauren and Grant's engagement. The way a held breath sits in your chest before you realize you're still holding it. The engagement itself was lovely, mostly. Patricia took over almost everything, which I told myself was generosity. She owned the venue, after all. I offered to help with flowers, with the guest list, with anything. Most offers were met with a bright, closed-door smile. We've really got it handled, Carol, don't you worry. At a family dinner 6 weeks out, when I mentioned I'd like to be seated with the immediate family, Patricia said it plainly, to the whole table, with a little laugh so it could be denied later. Carol is sweet, but she doesn't really understand how formal weddings work. Nobody corrected her. Grant looked at his plate. Lauren looked at me, and then looked away. And that looking away told me more than the comment did. I didn't say a word. I filed it. The way I used to file a client's inconsistent bank statement, not as proof of anything yet, just as a pattern starting to take shape. I want to be clear about Patricia because it would be easy to make her a cartoon, and she wasn't one. She wasn't cruel for sport. She was a woman who had nearly lost everything once, and had rebuilt it into something polished and admired. And somewhere in that rebuilding she'd decided that polish was the same thing as worth. People who don't shine the way she shines simply didn't register to her as fully real. I registered as a soft, agreeable background figure, the bride's mother, harmless, easily managed. She wasn't trying to wound me. She just genuinely believed I didn't matter enough to bother wounding. In some ways, that's the deeper insult, and it's the one Walter had seen coming from a mile off. I did try, once more, to raise the seating with Lauren directly. 10 days before the wedding, I asked her gently whether I'd be sitting with the family. My daughter, exhausted, stretched thin between 2 households, wanting only for the day to go smoothly, looked at me and said, "Mum, please don't make this about you. Patricia has the seating handled." And that was that. I want to be honest with you. That sentence hurt more than anything Patricia ever said, because Patricia was never mine to lose. Lauren was. I had raised that girl to negotiate her own salary and read her own contracts. And in the one moment I asked her to stand up for me, she asked me instead to be smaller. I didn't blame her, exactly. I understood what months of Patricia's pressure does to a person. But understanding a wound and not feeling it are two different things, and I felt that one all the way down. I trusted the plan. I always trust the plan right up until the moment I stop needing to. The rehearsal dinner was the night before, in the vineyard's private tasting room, and it was there that the pattern stopped being a series of small slights and became something I couldn't pretend not to see. There were toasts. Patricia gave one, of course, warm and polished, thanking everyone who built this family and this place, her late husband, her sister, her business partner, a supplier who'd become a friend. She did not mention me. That was expected by then, and I'd have let it pass. But at the end, when the maid of honor suggested the two mothers each say a few words to the couple, Patricia stood, spoke beautifully for 3 minutes, and then sat back down and moved directly into dessert, and the moment simply closed over my head like water. Nobody handed me the floor. Nobody noticed it hadn't been offered. I sat with a few words I'd written on an index card in my purse. Words about Lauren as a little girl balancing a checkbook at the kitchen table, and I folded the card back into my bag without a sound and clapped for the cake. A cousin of Grant's, a kind young woman who'd had a glass too many, leaned over and whispered, "Weren't you going to say something?" And I smiled and said, "Another time." That was the moment I understood, all the way down, that this was not going to correct itself. These were not people who were going to look up one day and see me. Walter had known that about them before I had. He'd known it the way he knew most things early, precisely, and in writing. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me that night, because I don't think revenge is the right word for it, and I've never used it lightly. I didn't feel rage. Rage is hot, and hot things burn out. What I felt driving home from that rehearsal dinner was closer to clarity, the cold, level certainty of a woman who has finally finished hoping. 3 things were true at once, and I let myself hold all 3 without flinching. The first was that I loved my daughter and would not do anything to wound her marriage. The second was that I had been erased, deliberately and repeatedly, by people who found erasing me easier than seeing me. And the third was that my husband, 3 years in the ground, had left me a way to make the truth speak for itself, without my having to raise my voice a single degree. All 3 true together. I slept well that night. I hadn't in weeks. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early, the way I always do, in the blue dress I'd had tailored twice. I found my seating card myself, because nobody walked me to it. Row 4, behind the second interior pillar of the restored chapel, the one piece of architecture in the entire building that blocked a direct line of sight to the altar. When I asked the coordinator, gently, if there'd been a mix-up, that's when I heard her say it to another staff member, not realizing I was close enough. "We'll just tuck her behind the column, she won't mind. She's easy." Patricia's front row was reserved for her sister, her business partner, and 2 donors from the Vineyards Wine Club. My daughter's mother was seated behind a support beam, so a wine club member could have an unobstructed view. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I found my seat, and I sat in it, hands folded, back straight, the way I sat through 31 years of difficult conversations across a bank desk. 'Cause here's something I learned a long time ago behind that counter. The moment you raise your voice in a room that has already decided who you are, you become the story they wanted to tell about you, the difficult one, the dramatic one, the mother who couldn't let her daughter have her day. I wasn't going to give them that story. I've watched too many women hand it over for free in the exact moment they were owed an apology, and walk away holding nothing but the label the room pinned on them on the way out. So I sat. I watched guests I didn't know file into the good seats. I watched a woman from the wine club take the chair that, by every ordinary rule of a wedding, should have been mine, and settle into it without the faintest idea it had ever belonged to anyone else. I folded my hands in my lap, and I felt the old, familiar quiet come down over me, the one Walter used to call my closing face, the expression I wore across the desk when a decision had already been made, and the person across from me didn't know it yet. Calm, patient, certain. Underneath the blue dress and the cardigan and the pillar, I was the calmest person in that chapel, and I was the only one who knew why. 3 rows back, Harold Doyle sat with a leather folder on his lap. That folder was the only reason I stayed quiet. I knew that folder was there. I'd known for 3 years, known it existed, known what it was for, though never once the exact words sealed inside it. And I'll tell you exactly how it came to be read aloud in front of 200 people in a moment. But first, I need you to understand that I didn't put it there that morning to humiliate anyone. It had been sitting in Harold's office since before Lauren and Grant were even engaged, waiting the way Walter left most things waiting, in writing, in case they were ever needed. That morning it stopped being a precaution and started being a plan, and the person who turned it from one into the other wasn't me. It was whoever decided a wine club donor deserved my chair. Harold had been invited as an old family friend, which was true, and which was also the least of what he was that day. Inside the folder was Walter's sealed letter. That morning, before a single guest arrived, Harold had handed a copy to the officiant, a soft-spoken man named Reverend Aldous, whom Patricia had personally selected because he photographed well and explained that the bride's late father had requested it be read aloud at the ceremony. Reverend Aldous, who had married more couples than he could count, and knew a father's last wish when he heard one, agreed without hesitation. It was the simplest arrangement in the world. No legal maneuvering, no fine print, just a promise a dead man had left behind, handed to a decent man who saw no reason not to keep it. The ceremony began. Grant's face when Lauren came down the aisle was the kind of face that makes you forgive a lot of things, and for a moment, watching my daughter glow through a half-obstructed pillar view, I softened toward all of it. I want you to know that. I wasn't sitting there stewing in vengeance. I was sitting there being a mother, mostly, with one small, cold, clear thread of resolve running underneath it, the way a river runs under ice. If you've ever sat in a room and watched people you love hand your dignity to someone who didn't earn it, and stayed calm, and said nothing, and waited, then you already know the feeling I'm describing. Stay with me, because in about 2 minutes a soft-spoken reverend is going to open a folder, and everything those 200 people thought they knew is going to rearrange itself in the space of a single paragraph. Drop 1 word in the comments right now, just one for every time you were told not to make it about you. I read them. And I want to be honest with you about that thread of resolve, because this is the part people get wrong about stories like mine. I did not want to stop my daughter from becoming a wife. I only wanted the truth spoken before everyone began pretending. That was all. Not ruin, not spectacle. Just the truth, said once, out loud, in front of the people who'd spent months deciding it didn't matter. The vows were lovely, ordinary and lovely, the way most true ones are. And then Reverend Aldous reached the part of the program that read, in Patricia's own elegant calligraphy on the printed order of service, a family blessing. Patricia had planned that moment for herself. She had written her own remarks, a tribute to the family legacy of Whitmore Vineyard, meant to be the emotional centerpiece before the vows concluded. But Reverend Aldous, holding both letters, made a quiet decision about which one a father's dying wish outranked. He looked toward Harold, who gave the smallest possible nod. And then he said, "Before we close, the bride's father asked that a letter be read at this ceremony, prepared before his passing." A ripple went through the crowd, the kind that happens when 200 people realize, all at once, that the program they were handed is not actually the whole story. He began to read. To whoever is seated in this chapel today, my name was Walter Bennett, and I am not able to be here, but I wanted to be. 9 years ago, before my daughter Lauren ever met the man she is marrying today, I quietly purchased the note on this property to save it from foreclosure. I never told the Whitmore family who held their mortgage. I never wanted credit. I wanted a business that mattered to this town to survive. And I hoped that someday, my own family would be treated the way I hoped that family would treat others once they were safe again. I am asking my attorney, Harold Doyle, to forgive the remaining balance on that note as a wedding gift on one condition: that my wife, Carol Bennett, was seated today with the honor a mother of the bride is owed, in the front row, in full view of her daughter's face. If that condition was met, Harold has my authorization to file the forgiveness this week. If it was not, the note remains active at its original terms, and Harold will explain the balance to anyone who asks. I trust my wife to have told him honestly, because in 36 years of marriage, she never once needed me to check her word. They could move my chair. They could not move the papers. And now, in a chapel full of people who thought they already knew who I was, the papers were finally speaking. The chapel went silent. In the specific way, 200 people go silent when they are all doing the same math at the same time. You could feel it move through the room in a wave. The wine club members, the donors, the friends of the Whitmores who'd spent years admiring Patricia's beautiful, effortless success, all of them recalculating at once. Effortless. That was the word that died in that room. Nothing about the vineyard had been effortless. It had been saved, in the dark, by a quiet man. Nobody in that chapel had ever bothered to know, whose widow they'd hidden behind a pillar. I watched my daughter's face from behind that pillar, one small sliver of it visible between the stone and the flowers, and I watched it move through confusion, then dawning horror. Then, something that looked almost like relief, because Lauren had spent the whole morning uneasy about that seating chart and had never found the nerve to fight it. Grant turned slowly and looked toward row 4, toward the pillar, and for the first time all day, someone actually looked for me. Patricia's face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. It went from polished composure to a kind of grey, calculating panic. The expression of a woman running numbers she suddenly, badly needed to run correctly. Harold stood, unhurried, the way lawyers do when they've been waiting years for exactly this moment. "For the record," he said, pitched just loud enough to carry, Mrs. Bennett was seated in row 4, behind the interior pillar, at the direction of the venue's staff. I have the seating chart, and I photographed it this morning, along with statements from 2 guests who overheard the decision being made. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Patricia stood, and here is where I want to be fair to her, because a woman is never only a villain in her own story. Her hands pressed flat against the white tablecloth, like she needed something solid to hold. "This is absurd," she said, brittle now. "It was a seating error, a coordinator's mistake. How was I supposed to know some legal document existed that hinged on where Carol was sitting? Nobody told me there were conditions. That's the non-apology, and I want you to notice it, because you'll hear its cousins in your own life eventually. Not, 'I'm sorry I dismissed her.' Just, 'How was I supposed to know?' As if dignity should only be extended to people whose importance has been notarized in advance. As if I hadn't been my daughter's mother for 31 years, without a single clause attached. I stood up myself, then, for the first time all ceremony, and my voice did not shake. 'Patricia,' I said, 'you didn't need a document to know how to seat the mother of the bride. You needed manners. Walter just made sure manners came with consequences, because he knew some people only change behavior when it costs them something.' A few guests applauded softly. The way people do when they aren't sure it's appropriate, but can't help themselves. Patricia's business partner would not meet her eyes. And I watched the room do the thing rooms do when the ground shifts under someone who has always stood at the center of them. The wine club donors, seated in the good chairs, went very still. A woman in the second row, who I later learned was the president of the Regional Bridal Association, leaned to her husband and murmured something behind her program. These were Patricia's people, the ones whose admiration she'd spent a decade cultivating, the ones for whom she'd built a front row that had no place in it for the bride's own mother. And every one of them was now recalculating what they'd witnessed and what it would mean at the next luncheon, the next fundraiser, the next wedding held on those 42 acres. Patricia had built her whole life on being seen a certain way. In the space of one read-aloud letter, she was being seen a different way entirely, by exactly the audience she cared about most. She hadn't lost money that day. She'd lost the story she told about herself. And I understood, watching her understand it, that Walter had chosen a chapel full of her own people on purpose. He always did know which room a truth needed to be spoken in. Lauren was crying by then. The good kind. The kind that comes when a daughter realizes her mother has been quietly protecting her, long before she knew she needed protecting. She walked straight down that aisle in her wedding dress, past her new mother-in-law, past the flowers, and put her arms around me right there behind the pillar, in front of everyone. "Mum, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I would never have let them do that to you." And I believed her, but I also held her a beat longer than comfort required, because we both knew she'd told me not to make it about myself, and we both knew now whose day it had actually needed protecting. Here's what happened next, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. Mercy and consequence can sit at the same table, and that day I made sure they did. I told Harold to forgive the note in full. I never wanted that contested, because punishing the business would have punished my own daughter's new home. But 3 things had to happen, and Patricia signed all of them in the vineyard's back office, within the hour, hand not quite steady. First, she signed a written amendment to the forgiveness, drafted by Harold on the spot. Second, 11% of the forgiven balance was redirected into an education trust, not for Lauren and Grant, but for their future children, my future grandchildren, administered by Harold and untouchable by anyone else. And third, she signed a short, plain acknowledgement of my standing as a full member of the family, to be read once at their next gathering. Not because a signature could manufacture respect, because Walter always said the same thing: get it in writing and let the behavior follow. I remember the back office being very quiet while she signed. The band was playing cocktail hour music, 2 rooms away, muffled and cheerful, like nothing at all had happened in the chapel. Patricia read each page carefully. She was, whatever else she was, a businesswoman, and businesswomen read before they sign. When she reached the education trust clause, she paused, and I saw her understand something in that pause. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a punishment aimed at her. It was a gift aimed at children who didn't exist yet, secured against the possibility that the people around them might someday forget to be kind to the ones who came before. She looked up at me, and for one unguarded second the polish was gone, and there was just a tired woman who had almost lost everything once, being shown, without cruelty, exactly what she owed. "He thought of everything," she said. I told her the truth. No, he just thought of it in writing, which most people never do. Patricia Whitmore still runs her venue. She still photographs beautifully. But in the 3 years since, she has never once failed to personally confirm my seat before a family gathering, and she has never again called me easy. At Lauren's baby shower last spring, she walked over unprompted and moved my chair one place closer to the front before a single guest arrived. Neither of us said a word about why. We didn't need to. And Lauren. My Lauren calls me every Sunday now. Sometimes she calls just to ask where I'd like to sit at the next family dinner, and we both laugh a little when she does, in the careful way you laugh about a thing that once cut deep and has finally healed clean. She never told me not to make it about myself again. She didn't have to. She understood. watching a letter she'd never read reach across 3 years to protect a mother she'd asked to be smaller, exactly what her father had understood before her. The acknowledgement Patricia signed that day was read aloud 6 weeks later, at the couple's first hosted dinner on the vineyard, in front of the same sister and business partner who'd taken the good seats at the wedding. It was 3 sentences long, plain and unadorned, naming me a full member of the family and welcoming me to every table the family ever set. Patricia read it herself, in her own steady voice, because Walter's amendment had specified she would. I watched her read it, and I felt no triumph, only a kind of quiet settling, the sense of a thing finally put in its proper place. Respect that has to be signed for is not the warmest kind, but it holds. And sometimes, with certain people, holding is where warmth eventually learns to grow. If there's one thing I'd hand you from all of this, it's this. Quiet is not the same as powerless. They could move my chair. They could not move the papers. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.